Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the International Brotherhood of Magicians official podcast. Welcome back. Glad to have you. I'm Jason Michaels. I've got Ben Young with me. I've got Scott Cantrell with me, and we are joined by a special guest today, somebody that I am very excited to catch up with, Michael Kent. Hello, Michael.
Hey, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Oh, man, so excited to
See you
get
too,
to
man.
catch up with you and learn about what you've been doing and dive into your career. Ben, I'm going to throw you under the bus here. Like, you're a
Yeah,
big Michael Kent fan, aren't you?
I'm a big Michael Kent fan.
Yeah, don't you
Yeah.
have like a little bit of there's a little
There's a
story
shrine in your apartment.
there.
Pretty sure.
Yeah,
I haven't set it up since moving into the new apartment.
Oh,
but
okay.
Oh.
yeah.
yeah, I haven't paid for him to do it yet. Is the problem?
That's right.
I haven't given you my new address. You can just mail the check. Yeah.
I met Ben when he was. Were you in high school when I met you, or college? It's hard
I
to
was
tell.
I
with
was in
you.
early college. Early college.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it may have just as well been like middle school with you. I mean,
Yeah.
you look
Right.
the same.
Yeah.
But you came to a college show I did in
Yeah.
what was it, Maryville?
Well, you know what? I forgot that you did that one. I actually drove to Chattanooga to see you, which was
Oh.
like 2 hours away.
UT Chattanooga.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can get into his whole story, but basically, you were the reason I got into comedy magic in the first place.
What? Are you
I am
serious?
so sorry. I was apologizing to Jason and Scott. Just
Yeah, thanks a lot.
So, I was a freshman in college, and at that point, I I mean, I knew about comedy magic, I guess, but in my head, if you were gonna be a professional magician, it was still the like being an illusionist and having the boxes and all the production and the lights and the assistants and all that stuff. And then a friend of mine sent me a video of you doing your snowstorm routine. And I was like, what is this? And I
this is a
started
thing
like
you can do?
I started looking into you, and I'm like, he's doing all of these shows, and it's like a suitcase, and it's about his personality. I should get one of those.
Yeah.
Which
And
is that
so
a
then-
suitcase or a personality?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A personality.
Both are available on the internet. I can't take like, obviously, I had the same realization that you did, Ben, and I was a teenager, probably early college. And when I grew up, and a lot of people before me grew up, we all were trying to be David Copperfield, right? Like, everyone was trying to be the illusionist, or not even necessarily illusionist, but presenting magic in a way that we felt like it had to be dramatic. And I think a lot of that comes from where we started magic. A lot of us started because we were, trying to somehow hold power over our peers when we were little kids or something, and that grows into this thing where you're trying to be mysterious. And I was up there trying to tell these serious stories on stage, and people were laughing because they didn't buy it, because I didn't buy it. And it let me know that, like, they're more willing to accept me as a comedy performer than anything else. And so that sort of shaped how I created material. And so, I was looking at the people like Mac King and Penn and Teller and, the amazing Jonathan. And these were the people that really let me know that that's a thing that could be done. And now, whether or not that was going to work as a career, I didn't know, but I just knew that got me the best responses on stage. And it's always more fun to write and to choose material when you have constraints put on you. Like, it's a lot more productive when you say, like, this is who I am and this is who I am not. So I was able to say, like, okay, at that time, my moniker was going to be comic, magician, smartass.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, everything that went into my show had to be at least two of those three things. It's okay if it wasn't magic, as long as it was comedy and it had like a little bit of an edge or a twist to it, and it's likewise, if it was magic that wasn't funny, but there was like an edge to it, I'm thinking like maybe like a Monty routine or something like that. There were ways that I could, work in at least two of those three things. And it was a really nice framework to be able to choose material.
Yep.
That's really followed me through my whole career, that sort of mantra of like, this is who I am on stage. This is the material that I'm choosing. I feel like we just
Yeah.
got real deep real quick.
Well, yeah,
I
I
like it.
We
realized
skipped an
we
intro.
forgot to do the intro.
Yeah.
So Michael Kent is one of the top performing touring comedy magicians in the country.
And has
Huge in the
been for a
college
while.
market. Yeah, has been for a while.
23 years this year.
Wow.
How many?
23.
23. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, Michael, I've often thought that, because you go to magic conventions, you go to magic meetings and things like this. And I have thought since the days, and I'm not in the college market anymore, but that's how I became familiar with you. That's how I got to know you years ago when I was in that market. And I remember thinking at one point as I was attending a magic convention or whatever, I thought to myself, it's a real shame that the folks who are working in this market and a lot of like legitimate workers, people who are out there doing real shows for real audiences. Sometimes they're great audiences, sometimes they're not so great audiences, sometimes they're great situations, sometimes the venue or the situation is stacked against you. But I often thought it was a shame that more magic conventions weren't like putting together, like hiring, like how cool would it be to hire 3 college performers, let them do their shows, also ask them to do a panel where they do like Q&As and like give their opinions, stuff like that. I have often thought that this is an entire group of legitimate workers who are just being completely ignored by the magic community, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I don't see it necessarily as a shame. I kind of see it as the way I see any deep niche market. There are amazing magicians performing on cruise ships and do nothing but cruise ships, and most magicians don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with trade shows, same thing with corporate events. Like, and I think that when you spend all of your time in a market that, the only way that magicians know of other magicians are A, if you release something to the magic community, or B, if you're performing at conventions. I mean, outside of that, the only way to know other magicians is through like friendships and things. So, or being in a market with those people. And up until a few years ago, I had done neither. The only time I've ever performed at magic conventions is here at Magi Fest, usually as a host, where I'm emceeing a show or something like that. It's here in my hometown. So I've been going to Magi Fest since I was like 16. And I have put out 1 trick and 1 lecture to the magic community. So if you're not familiar with my work, those are how you know me, is just through those things. It provides like such a small little window to know who someone is. And I think it would be a lot of fun to do a magic convention where, a few college performers were grouped together. Now, that said, I'm not sure what it would look like in terms of the actual show, because a magic show on a college campus isn't all that different than a magic show anywhere else. There are preconceived notions of what a magic show on college campuses is. And for some people, that's true, where maybe it's a little bit more blue than what you would do at a corporate event, a more relaxed, maybe more pop culture references. But that's not necessarily what colleges are looking for. Colleges just want an entertainer that's going to entertain. They just want someone who is going to be solid, polished, that the students that come to the show enjoy. And so I don't know. It would be fun. I think the panel would be fantastic because there are a lot of questions. A few years ago, I wrote an article for one of the magic magazines because I was asked so often, hey, how do I get to perform in colleges? And I'm sure when you were doing colleges, you had the same. People would ask you, what do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? Do I need to do these conferences? How does this work? And so I wrote an article that it's sort of a negative article, but it's a positive article, but it tells the truth. It says, look, these venues are not ideal venues for magic or for any show. A lot of them. Many times, more than half of the time, you're in a multi-purpose room with all the lights on, with a riser stage, and a section of those are what we refer to as nooners, where it's literally a show at noon on a non-traditional campus, meaning they might not have residence halls. And so these are students that have families and jobs that might be 30 years old and going to college for the first time and leaving the campus at 3 p.m. when their classes are over. how do we entertain these folks? Because they have programming budgets too. How do we entertain these folks? And the most common way they do that is by holding a show at lunch in the lunchroom. And it is a very common thing for entertainers to do. There's always one table of people playing Magic the Gathering, which I don't know why that happens, but it's true. It's like it's a truism in the college market. And ironically, those people are not the ones that are into Magic. I don't get it. Like, I'm doing real live wizardry for you, but you gotta do the wizardry on your cards. Anyway, and you're sitting there trying to do your show, and there's an announcement like number 34 chicken fingers, number 34 chicken fingers are up, and it's just one of those things that you cannot avoid. It's not fair to say I won't do noon shows on college campuses because A, that's a large market, and B, those students need entertainment just like anyone else does, so that brings me to another thing that we can talk about here in a little bit about the state of college shows currently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But to get too far ahead of myself, I was performing straight out of college, doing 4 nights a week in restaurants. And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Was this close-up magic in restaurants?
Yeah. I was
Okay.
doing, just table magic in different restaurants around town, 4 nights a week. And I had graduated from Ohio State. And I thought this was like an awesome life, right? I was going out and working 2 hours, 3 hours a night. I was making okay money, but I was single at the time and had a little condo. Like, I didn't need crazy money at the time, right? And then I would spend all day at the pool and then just go and do the restaurant. It was wonderful. I got really good at dealing with people in doing that. Restaurant magic is really good to not even talking about chops, like magic chops, but just dealing with every type of situation that a person can say when you're performing magic. Mm-hmm. And, you get sick of yourself. You get sick of the lines that you're saying over and over and over at the tables. But I've always said the best magic mimics a social interaction. And I think that restaurants are close-up magic in general. Strolling magic is really good for that because you can approach a group of people like a magician, or you can approach a group of people like a human who knows magic tricks and is really fun to be around.
Right.
And you have that choice to make. And for me, I always enjoyed performing in a way that's a lot more human and a lot more less formal. A lot less formal and less, I don't want to use the word showy because obviously there's showmanship in all of this. But it got me figuring out a little bit who I was when I was performing, doing 40 to 50 tableside shows in a period of a couple hours is a really good way to sort of figure that stuff out. Realized after a while that I wanted to, get married, and my wife's parents weren't going to look too greatly on someone who just does card tricks for a living. I got a day job. I was a marketing director. And then I decided, after a few years of that, I decided I was going to give it a shot because I was doing college shows in my vacation time and using up all my vacation time. And so I made the break and I said, I'm going to be a performer. And the cool thing about that is I still work with that company. That was my full-time job back when. I still do their marketing. It's just not on a full-time basis, and I still have that I can do. It's just a little bit of diversification, added, income and whatnot. And it's nice, too, when I come home to have something else that's, if I've been on the road for 3 weeks, like I have been, to do something that has nothing to do with my career and nothing to do with magic and still feeling productive and working and things. So it's kind of like a hobby that pays me.
Well, it's, I would think that it would be good, actually, to stay on top of the marketing trends and whatnot, because obviously technology has changed, like just the way that society, the things that they are that are acceptable societally, that has changed from the time that you first got started or when you were doing it full time to now.
Sure.
So that actually keeping up with all of that stuff for a quote unquote traditional businesses, I guess what we'll call it.
Yeah, a real job. You can say real job.
That would help you stay on top of it for yourself, and vice versa. The stuff that you're doing for you helps them.
It does,
because you could apply it.
It was amazing how similar the two jobs were. And I had a sales call yesterday with a client selling shows where 100% my marketing background came into play and sold it like no problem. I can get into a little bit of the detail on that, and it was just the client threw out a seed of an idea
Mm-hmm.
on promotion, and I was able to take that and say, okay, but if you do this, then they'll say this, and they'll want to do this. And I was able to take that, and all I was doing was using what I knew from marketing. That's not stuff that I would have learned just from being a magician. So, everything that we do that's outside of magic makes us better magicians. Everything, hobbies, friends, everything that we do outside of magic makes you a better magician because it makes you a more complete human.
Friends? What's
friends? Absolutely.
Friends? What's friends? What?
Because you learn things from your friends that you might not know anyway.
Scott,
Scott.
Friends was a TV show in the 90s.
Oh, okay.
I missed your joke. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It was a very poor attempt, so it's no worries.
Yeah. I can hook you up with a website where you can buy some if you
Oh,
want.
perfect. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Scott, in the next podcast, Scott's going to have a few people just standing over his shoulder. Those are Scott's friends. He hires them. Man, there's a lot here. I got stuff I want to talk about, but I don't want to. I always seem to monopolize the conversation, so I'm going to leave it.
Was that a sufficient intro of who I am? I feel like I don't know if people. Yeah, it's basically. So now I've been performing for 23 years, and primarily for the last, 20, or up until the last few years, it's been almost all colleges. There were times when I was doing like 80 colleges a year. Not doing anything near that now. I don't think anyone is. But now, man, it's just a grab bag of all kinds of different things, and we can talk about that too.
That's actually a good segue because I was curious as to what that market was like now because I can only imagine the nature of the shift without being involved in it. I worked with Jason a little bit, which is how we met originally as well.
Yeah.
So had an introduction to that market then.
Sure.
But that was a number of years ago. So that's actually a perfect segue into the status of the college market and kind of what that looks like today, in terms of your experience.
I mean, if you talk to anyone who's been in the college market for more than 10 years, they'll tell you, oh, it's just horrible. I want to say that, but at the same time, okay, so basically it goes like this. Leading up to the late 2010s, like 2017, 2018, we were seeing a bit of a decline in bookings, and I'm not really sure what to blame that on. It may have just been a dip that was going to come back up, and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm not blaming COVID for what's going on now because it's been 6 years. But what happened was those years, those formative years when those students were in high school and missing out on, those are really important years to learn how to go to things as groups and, and do things with your friends. So they were missing out on that. And everyone, all of us, even us, we learned how to self-entertain. And we're all consuming content on our own schedule. It's life a la carte. We pick and choose what we want when we want it. And if we want to watch 10 minutes of this show and then go and do something else, our attention spans are much shorter than they used to be just because of the way that we consume content now. And what happened was then when shows finally came back in person in like 2022, audiences were not coming. There were not college students like it was when I was in school. You'd get your whole floor would go to an event. You would all walk together from your residence hall to the union and go to something together. And that wasn't happening. It was really hard to get people to go to things. Wow. And after a couple of years of that, the student activities advisors who are deciding what events to put on were saying, why don't we do something that we know they're going to go to? And it was sort of throwing in the towel a little bit, because I did an event in January in the middle of Utah where there were 900 students. And it felt like old times. 2 standing ovations, not to brag or anything, but like it felt the way that it did, in those August shows, those welcome week shows back in 2012 and 2013, where, there's just tons of excitement and energy. So I think it's still there. I think that it's growing and it's going to come back. the way that the conferences work. So if you're unfamiliar, like basically there are a couple different associations that help to hook up entertainers with entertainment buyers in the college market. And these happen year round all over the country. And you pay a lot of money to join these things and to be a part of them. And if you are lucky enough to get a showcase at one of these things, it used to be you would do a 10-minute showcase or a 15-minute showcase on stage and come away with a full calendar. If you had a great showcase, you would come away with a full calendar. That just doesn't happen anymore.
Wow.
You can have a great showcase, and it might not really mean a whole lot in terms of bookings, but it's still important to do, because if you do a good show and you're a good person, if they, you're someone who they feel comfortable being around, and they need entertainment, they're still going to bring you in. And so I'm still doing a lot of college shows, not nearly as many as no one's doing as many as they were, but the market is still there, and the shows are every bit as fun as they used to be. Even if my record low for attendance was 6 people at it was one of those noon shows out in San Francisco, and I'm from Ohio, so I flew all day to get there and looking forward to it. And you get there and there's 6 students, and you better believe those 6 students got a heck of a show. I mean, I knew all their names. You know what I mean? Like they need entertainment just as much as if there were 600. It's super important. So, and sometimes you'll switch gears when that happens. You'll say, okay, well, this bit that I have sort of requires a fourth wall, and now maybe I'll slide into doing a close-up bit that I couldn't do if I was on stage for 600. And I'll have fun with it. I experiment. And it sort of becomes an exercise in flexibility,
Yep.
which is good for all of us to know. And you do it a few times, and then you realize what it's going to be like, and it's no longer scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, Scott, the college market is very different than it was a decade ago, but it's not gone.
Yep.
It's just not the same. So it's very difficult for me to say this is what it's like now, because I don't think anyone knows. It's they still want entertainers. They're still bringing in entertainers. It's not at the level that it used to be, but especially it's for a lot of colleges, if they get 60 to 80 people at the show, that's a win for them.
Wow.
And Jason can tell you, when you were doing it, like it would be more like 150 would be a win, 200 would be a win. So it's just different.
You alluded to this, and I guess nobody has a crystal ball to look in. But is your perception that there is this COVID generation? I know we're only talking about 3 or 4 years, depends on, I guess, their students all the way through those years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Freshmen in high school all the way through, I guess those students who were freshmen in college at the time are probably now mostly graduated. Do you perceive that this diminishment of the size of the market is permanent, temporary, or we just don't know yet? It's still too early in terms of the distance from COVID.
I'll definitely say we don't know yet, but I would lean toward, if I were to guess, that this is temporary.
Yeah.
What's going to get us out of it, I don't think necessarily is just getting away from those COVID years. I think what gets us out of it is a different thing that I'm hearing more and more after shows. And I even have a spiel in my show about this. 100 people have just heard each other laugh for an hour. And that's the best thing in the world. And it's only going to become more true as our experiences become more digital. You all remember 2021 when everyone had fatigue from Zoom meetings and screens, and they were like, I just don't want to do it anymore. Yep. I want something different. I think that's what we're seeing now too. I think that people are hungry for real experiences, and that's only going to become a bigger issue with AI and with so much of the content that we consume being from screens. There's going to be sort of a resurgence of live entertainment in general. Because, I mean, look at concerts. When concerts came back, like they weren't making as much money as they were, but people were still going to shows. They're still selling out. Concert tickets are more expensive than they've ever been. That shows you that people are going. So those experiences are still needed. And the thing with magic is that most people that you're performing for have never seen a magician live, so they don't know how much they're going to like it. But once they do, once you do that shit, and it's on us, right? Like, it's on us to be that person to make them say, oh my God, I didn't know I would like this, but I do. So.
Good.
So tell me, oh, Ben, were you going to dive in there? I thought you were.
No.
Okay. So let me ask this question because I'm fascinated. A lot of magicians love the idea of incorporating comedy into what they do, but comedy is very difficult to do well. And I think the little that I've played around with comedy, when you put somebody in this state where they're laughing, it's a different like mindset than when they're analytical and they're watching a magic trick and they have to understand sort of the quote unquote rules of magic. You know, you have to understand that there are certain parameters. We're going to set these parameters up and then we're going to get to the big moment and that's going to create the experience of magic. I'm really interested in both how you combine comedy and magic together to make them work, but even before that, I'm interested in kind of how you like how did you find out you were like how did you really like dive into comedy? Like did you study? Were you going to comedy clubs at some point and like doing open mics? Like how did you really develop your style and then combine that in, or maybe combining it in magic was just what naturally happened?
Yeah, I did in college. I did open mics, just doing stand up, and it's super scary, right? You're super vulnerable up there, super vulnerable. It was good to do, and because it teaches you how to write and how to listen to other comedians and figure out why this joke works. And I've always studied comedy since I was a little kid. You know, my a lot of my influences were comedians rather than magicians when I was growing up. You know. But I was buying the books, you know, all the how to write stand-up comedy joke books and things like that. And I've always just been a big consumer of stand-up. And I don't these days because I feel like sometimes it's a common thing. Those rhythms and speech patterns will find their way into my brain without me realizing it. And I really don't want to do that. I do that with magic too. If I'm working on a routine and I know someone else is doing a routine with that prop or that type of trick, I purposely will hold myself off from watching it until after I've written what I want to do with it, because I don't want those influences to come in a way that's going to be derivative of their work. But that said, I mean, you know, there's a great book, Austin Kleon, Steal Like an Artist is a great book.
Great
and it sort of talks about how like all artists steal. That's how we know how to create art, is because we're building off of the work of other people. And there's an ethical way and a non-ethical way. And to be influenced is not bad stealing, you know. You might be stealing this idea where here's an example. It's an embarrassing example from early in my career. Growing up, always going to the Copperfield show and then come in town, and Chris Kenner would perform an intermission show. And he did a thing called the Texas Trick. And the Texas Trick was basically trying to get someone to say the word, the state Texas. And he told someone to think of a state and don't let me influence you or whatever. And then he pulls out a big card out of an envelope, and it's shaped like Texas. And he starts talking with a Texas accent. And then they say Alabama, and he turns around and it says Alabama. And before he puts it away, an accordion fold thing comes down with all the different states on it. And so it's a throwaway, okay? I, early in my career, loved that, and I thought that I was making it mine by making it the yellow trick. So instead of Texas, it was the color yellow. So I'd pull a yellow card out, and I would find these lines like, don't yellow until I ask you to yellow, you know, little things like that. And I was doing the same trick. I was turning around, it would say green, and then all the things would fall down. And it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that is the trick, that I am stealing in a very not ethical way, okay? But I also, so I looked at it and I said, what is it that's funny about this? What do I like about this? And what I liked about it was a moment that I wrote where the person says the wrong thing and then I insult them. I call them a name. That got the biggest laugh of anything, because I was breaking, it was the first time in the show that I was acting like a human and not like a magician. I was saying, I won't say on your pod, I don't know, you guys probably keep this pretty clean. So
I really wish you could.
I know, but
we
anyway.
all know the word.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I'll just say the way I do it on like corporate events and cruise ships is I call him a jerk, and now it's a whole. But that's the only thing I kept. The rest of it I completely rebuilt so it was mine. And the only thing that's similar is the idea of trying to get someone to say something and then being mad when they don't. And that's it. The rest of it, I realized it was not mine. And so I looked at what was working. I said, what makes them laugh about this? What's funny about this? And then build it around that. And and I have studied comedy. You know, a good friend of mine, Jonathan Burns, who will be at the I.B.M. convention.
Very excited about that.
He and I studied at the Second City Training Center together. We did a couple different levels of comedy writing and improv training with them. And that was another big, like, mind-opening experience to learning how to write comedy. One of my comedy writer teachers I still keep in touch with. He's on my podcast often. I did a show with him last year in Chicago. Joe James, shout out. You're not listening. You're not a magician, but that's okay. Anyway, so you learn, you know, what is the structure of comedy, but more than that, what is the structure of comedy when I'm doing it? What is it that they want to see from me? And who do they think I am when I walk on the stage? Because if what I say and do doesn't fit that, they're not going to like me. So there's a balance between being true to yourself as a comedian or as an artist and providing what they are going to want from you. So I've always tried to walk that line. Sometimes the comedy comes from situations, which a lot of magic tricks naturally lend themselves to comedy situations. Sometimes it's from something that magicians don't normally do, which is, you know, being a human on stage, being the way that their friend might treat them if they said this thing.
Absolutely. Yep.
You are saying so many things that we get into on the pod very regularly.
Good. Well,
we're always talking about, like,
no, it's good to hear.
No, it's good. It's validating. That way all the listeners know that we're not just coming up with it on our own. We're always talking about the artist versus like the commercial show and trying to find the balance between all that, being yourself. I am curious because we do get into a lot of like the heady kind of advanced things like this, like the really like knowing yourself and trying to convey that on stage. So for someone who is just now wanting to get into comedy magic, like let's say that right now they buy a trick and they're doing the script that comes with it, you know, and it has the built-in jokes, but they're not really developing any material on their own. What do you think they should do to get started?
Yeah, I think looking at something of, you know how like when you're learning a sleight, let's just use an example of like a false transfer with a coin or something. The way to practice it is by doing it for real, by actually taking the coin.
Right.
I think that the same thing applies with scripting. What would this look like if I wasn't doing magic? What would this be? What would it sound like? What would I be saying if, you know, I was just presenting this theme, you know, not even getting into talking about the magic. But for example, when I talk about the Rubik's Cube, I talk about the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. And on the screen behind me, there's pictures of 80s toys. And you know, now you're talking about things that people resonate with. We're telling a story. And that's a conversation that I could have with someone who doesn't know I'm a magician and with no magic going on whatsoever. We could talk about how they had no business marketing the Rubik's Cube as a children's toy in a world before the internet. You know, that it's a puzzle, and it's a hard puzzle for adults, you know. And that's kind of where I would start, you know, and I believe it's in Ken Weber's book. He talks about this thing where like you'd have like a 12-year-old coming out with it, you know. So I brought this box with me from my last trip to Egypt, and you know what I mean? Like you just have to look at like what you're doing. Does it make sense? Is it motivated? Is it organic? Can you build a story around what you know and what the audience thinks you know? And if you can, that's always going to hit so much harder because of the magic word authenticity.
Yeah.
You know, authenticity is king. If they do not believe you, they won't like you. And what are you drinking, Ben?
A sparkling water.
Oh, that's no fun. Hey, look,
It's 2 o'clock.
hey, it's 3 o'clock here, my friend. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's a great exercise. I was doing an interview with a journalist yesterday about this journalist is working on helping other journalists become more authentic and more believable when they're doing video stuff, because journalists might not have any training in video, but they're good at writing a story.
Mm-hmm.
And this person had seen my show and said, how do you sort of manipulate engagement through magic so that they believe you? And they're not going to believe me unless they know that I know who I am. Like, if I'm being authentic, and that's why, like, I can't do mentalism on stage very well. If I try to do mentalism in the middle of my magic show that has props and stuff, they're just going to think it's another trick. But if I really want it to be, so the way that I get around that is it's not me reading the minds, it's a device that I have that reads minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured out, like, that allows me to do mentalism without pretending that I can read minds, because quite honestly, if I came out and said that, it creates another one of those tensions that, like, Jason, you were talking about how, like, comedy sort of helps dissolve the barrier. There's the you versus me thing, right? I'm going to try to fool you, they're going to try to stop me from fooling them. And that tension that's created, it becomes more of a puzzle to be solved than entertainment to be enjoyed. When you watch a movie or a professional wrestling match, you're able to suspend your disbelief. I want magic to be the same thing. I want them, once I say this is a thing that reads people's minds, they're not sitting there saying, no, it isn't. That's a toy. It's instantly creating a ridiculously absurd situation that they know is not real. And if I don't acknowledge the elephant in the room that I am a grown man pretending to be a wizard, then they're not going to like me. Everyone knows that I'm not magic. It's my job to do something that would look like magic anyway.
For the thousands of people who won't listen to this podcast, Michael Kent just gave you the secret to actually being liked on stage.
I want to know how
Brilliant.
you stumbled upon authenticity, like, because that is not something. I mean, I say
Is it
stumbled.
something you made
No,
up,
that's a good
or
point.
did it come
How
naturally?
did you come to that realization? People don't come to that realization naturally very often, especially magicians.
I don't know. I mean, there's a bit of humility that has to happen. The first few years of my career, probably way too long, was built on ego and trying to be something that I wasn't. There has to be some vulnerability and some listening to the audience. But also, like, you have to know what you like in the real world, outside of the stage. You have to know who you are and what you like. Are you someone that loves sports? Like Paige Thompson, who incorporates sports into her performance because she loves baseball. She loves all sports. And so when Paige does a routine involving sports, it's legit. You believe her because, it's her. This doesn't apply to everything. You look at some characters, some people who do really heavy characters like Carissa as Lucy Darling. And, that is something where she has to work extra hard because that character is not her. There might be parts of it that are pulled from things in her brain, but when you're doing a character, you have to define it so much more heavily. You have so much more legwork to do because you might not know who that character is until you define it. And so for Lucy Darling to be authentic is a completely different thing. But for you, if you're performing as yourself or a version of yourself, it's important to know who you are, what you're like, and watch video of yourself. I get every show, 23 years in, every show on video, no matter what. There's always a camera in the back of the room, and sometimes I never watch it. Early on, I watched every one of them. And you can hear yourself. I don't want to say this as a truism. I'm not sure. I could hear myself saying things that I would not say, or speaking in a way that I would not speak, introducing a routine in a way that felt like I was introducing a routine, not that I was talking. I want it to feel like we're sitting in my living room and we're all friends and this is how I would talk. And I think that if you're not performing as some completely different character of yourself, you have to know who you are off stage in order to be authentic on stage. And this happens on stage, but it also happens in the writing, knowing what people will. I remember my very first college conference I went to, I had lunch with a comedian who I noticed this gay comedian performed more as a gay stereotype on stage than they were on off stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very uncomfortable question to ask, but I had to know if that was intentional or not. So I just asked it. I asked it exactly like that. I said, "You seem to be more of a stereotype when you're on stage than when you're off stage." And he told me what Don Rickles had told him, which is an amazing sentence to say. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Don Rickles said, the moment you walk on stage, the audience has an idea of who you are, maybe better than you do. And if what you say and what you do does not match that, they're not going to like you.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting advice. I don't know how true it is. It's been true for me. I think that it's true. I don't know. I'm not any sort of expert on that or anything, but I know that when I walk on stage, the way that you're dressed, the way that your hair is done, the way that you walk, your posture, they're making up judgments about you. That's their job. They're the audience. They're there to watch you and to judge what you're doing. And everything that you do has to acknowledge that. If you are a comedian like Ralphie May, who was obese, and you come on stage and you don't say something about that, and they don't know who you are, let's pretend that he wasn't famous or something, if you don't acknowledge it, it's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be tension there, and that's sort of the same thing with any sort of, like I know, Jason, you do a lot of work about Tourette's, and I know that you talk about it, but I think maybe I might be going off the rails here, but I feel like when you're performing, does the audience know that about
Usually
you?
not unless I bring it up.
Yeah, yeah. So then that's probably not something that's necessary to talk to them about if you're right off the bat like that.
Right. Right.
If you're just presenting a show and not, if it's not, you're not trying to motivate or inspire them or whatever with your personal story.
Right.
But I think that's important, knowing who you are. Ben has to talk about the fact that his name is Young and he looks 12. He has to talk about that. And you do.
And I do.
You do. Because that's what they're thinking. They're thinking, we paid a bunch of money for this guy to come in here and
Well, we're not talking about me anymore then. That's a lot of money, but
we're paying a bit of money.
Yeah, we're paying something. It's pay what you want.
And and he looks like he doesn't have experience or something. That's those are the types of things, the vulnerabilities that we have to consider when we go on stage, and all of those things lead toward authenticity. I don't think that there's a magic bullet for that. I don't think there's an exercise you can do other than just trying to figure out who it is that you are to them.
It also sounds like part of that questioning approach of yourself is, and maybe I'm saying the same thing in just different words, but it's about having as much empathy with the audience as you can in terms of coming on stage, knowing you don't know specifically the individuals in the room, at least in many cases you don't know the individuals in the room, especially if it's a large audience, but understanding this is a college audience and this is what they're going to be thinking about. And you mentioned pop culture references.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's two aspects. It seems to me that to really find your people, right, to find the congruency and where you're going to be received really well, you have to know enough about yourself to be authentic to yourself, but also know that the audience is going to appreciate that person.
Yeah.
And so that match, it's empathizing with the audience enough to know their position and what they believe and what their expectations are, and then being able to match those expectations without being incongruent or inauthentic of yourself.
That really is a great segue into another thing that I don't know if this is on your list to talk about, Jason, but in the couple decades that I've been doing colleges, the sensibilities of the audience have changed. And it is really important for the entertainer to know that. And I have gotten away with being edgier than what I would ever recommend for anyone on college campuses. I, have never really shied away from using language on stage that I would use in my everyday life. I would never, ever recommend a person do that. I just made that choice and somehow got away with it. Somehow it went really well. And I think it's because they could see I wasn't doing it for impact. They could see I was just being myself on stage or something like that. But one of the examples is the chicken trick that I do. So in this trick, I'm having someone put on rubber gloves and stick their hand up the butt of a rubber chicken. And when I was younger, I would always use a girl for this. And as I got older, I couldn't do that anymore because that gap between them and age between them and myself, it was growing. And they were a little bit more sensitive of this seeming a little bit more like exploitative in a way. So now I always use a guy. And when I switched to using a guy, like, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago, it's funnier. It's funnier with a guy. I was wrong in the beginning to, and so I have to be sensitive to the audience, but I also have to be very careful about what person I pick. Same with the thing with the color. When I call the guy a name, it's a very specific person that I've chosen in the audience to be that. And I've gotten to the point where I can look at an audience and know who that person's going to be as soon as I look at them. I just know. And sometimes it has nothing to do, I don't know them. They might be the nicest person in the world. But if they're wearing a ball cap and they're in the front 2 rows, that's going to be the person. Not only because the audience buys that the guy wearing a cap at a show might be a little bit of a jerk in quotation marks, but also because now the whole audience knows who I'm talking to because there's a visual marker.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a highlighter on that person that's the person I'm talking to, so they know who I'm talking to. But you go to a corporate event, or let's not use a corporate event because I don't always do that. That sometimes that's a little bit too much of a risk at a corporate event. But like a non-college-y show where people aren't wearing hats, I'm going to find someone who is on the younger side, like in their like 20s or 30s, and I like to use a guy who's sitting with other guys. Who, when I say that to him, when I call him a name, the other guys are going to laugh and hit him in the arm and say, "Yeah, you got it. You know who he is. You nailed it." That's what I want. Because then it creates that thing, like I said, where we're all a bunch of friends sitting in a living room having fun together. Not, I wouldn't even call it. It's not like crowd work or anything like that, where I'm like making fun of someone. It's the closest I get to it, but it's more like me just sussing out, like, we all do this with all of the routines where we use volunteers. We know what type of volunteer works best. And if you don't, you should define that for yourself. Try to figure out. Like, I know that in my rope trick, it's the only thing in my show where I use 2 volunteers, and they can be anyone. So if I have someone who really wants to be in the show, but they just don't seem like they'd be a good fit, or like, in colleges, if I see, like, if there's like a person in the audience with autism, I like to use them for the rope trick because I'm involving them in a way that it's safe for the show, it's safe for me, they're going to have a great time, and I don't need a particular like archetype for those volunteers. But everything else in the show, I know exactly who I want. I can almost like write a page defining who they are. Just because I know what works, what's going to get the best reaction for that.
I definitely want to point out, because as much as I would love for this conversation to go on for hours, we do have a limited amount of time.
We do?
Yeah. I know that you have influenced a lot of magicians for one very specific reason. Like, I've got friends that completely redid their show and the handling of stuff. You know what I'm talking about, don't you, Ben?
Yeah, I was gonna jump in with the
go
organic
ahead.
segue.
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Can I guess? Is it my shoes?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. You seem like someone that knows a lot about footwear.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't help but notice that nice microphone in front of you. Do you know anything about microphones outside of
Yeah.
the kind
This
of
particular
podcast world?
model was recommended to me by my friend Brian Saint, who's a wonderful magician
Hmm.
and also a wonderful voice actor.
Voiceover artist as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
I first started, okay, so I used to always wear, well, when I first started, I would wear a head-worn mic. The old Shure head-worn mic where you could see it and it was big
Yeah.
and it had a big old fluffy windscreen on the front of it. And I would do shows and feel like, Britney Spears when I was doing it, or Garth Brooks or something. And I switched to a lav mic, and I was using a lavalier mic. And Alon New first told me, he was like, why are you using a lav mic? You'll sound better, and if you switch to a handheld mic, you can work any room in the world. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, but I can also use this in anywhere. And then having more conversations with him and a lot of conversations with Ken Weber about this as well, I switched over to a handheld mic, and it was like one of those just, my mind just exploded with, it felt so much more comfortable and so much more free, which is the opposite of what a lot of magicians think about handheld mics. Um, there are, there are many, many reasons why a handheld mic is preferable for what I do. It's not for everyone. An illusionist might not want to wear a handheld mic. Someone who's doing really heavy character work, it might not make sense to use a handheld mic. But as a tool to have in your toolbox, it is essential. But I'm just going to give one quick example. You're at that corporate event, and you're holding a handheld mic. When you bring that handheld mic up to your mouth, the entire audience knows you're about to say something. So they lean in because they're used to that. Everyone knows what that is. The same thing happens when their CEO addresses them at that event. When the CEO holds the mic, he or she is about to talk. So it's a visual highlighter to say, like, okay, now listen. And vice versa, I can use that handheld mic to signal to the audience a punchline. There's a spot in the show where I want them to finish a sentence that I'm saying, and all I have to do is drop the mic away from my mouth, and they always do. I never tell them I want them to say the end of the sentence. I just drop the mic away and look at them, and they finish it for me. Because there's just an automatic, we've been trained. Our monkey brains just know this is what happens. So that's just one thing. You can't do that with with any sort of other microphone. Okay, I'll give you a few more. Another one is, I don't know if any of you do any stage whispering at all. Just giving instructions to people on stage that you don't need the audience to hear. If you're doing that and you have a head-worn mic and they can see you talking to the person on stage and they can't hear you, their takeaway is, oh, this is a secret. I'm not supposed to hear this because the mic's off. He or she have muted their mic. With a handheld mic, that's no longer an issue. Maybe the mic's in the stand and I just walk over and I say something to them, and now it's something that, maybe it's just not important. Okay. And I used to do this with, when I used to do the walking knot routine, the Pavel walking knot routine. I wanted to make sure, I would do it, instead of tying it to mic stands, I would have people hold the rope, which is super risky with that trick. If you're familiar with how that trick works, super risky. And there's no out if it goes wrong. So I would say to the person, I'm holding a pair of scissors as I'm saying this, whatever you do, don't move. With a very serious face. I'm doing this off mic, okay? The mic's in the stand. And don't let go until I say so. Those were the instructions that I would give them, and they never moved. Because to them, that now it's serious. It seems like more like a safety concern or something. I don't know exactly what the thinking, it never was a problem. But if I do that now and I've got a lav mic on and they can see me talking, now it seems like they're in on the trick, or, there are little things like that. You can use the mic much like a magic wand for billet switches. I've done that as well. I've used it for a bill switch. But the number one thing for me that I'm interested in, and maybe not everyone is sound quality. I want my voice to sound the way I want my voice to sound. And a handheld mic is always, they have amazing head-worn mics now. I mean, the DPA, the Countryman E6, like there are some incredible technologies with microphones, but none of them are going to give you the dynamic range of a larger diaphragm handheld microphone. So I travel with my own in case I don't like the one that they have at the venue, or if they don't have one at the venue. I travel with my own mic clip, which is just as important to me because I pull the mic in and out of that clip a lot. And what I have found from watching other entertainers watch my lecture, which is available wherever, it's called microphone management. And when I've had other entertainers tell me that they didn't realize they don't need both their hands as much as they thought they needed both hands at the same time.
Oh.
And if you do need both hands for a bit, there are ways to do that as well, whether it be through just working around a mic stand. And a little tip for you, if you're listening and you don't want to spend the $45 for the lecture, is put your props in front of the mic stand and work around it. It's not that different than just doing it the way that you're doing it. You just hold it in front of the mic stand. Don't create a barrier between your prop and the audience. So it's a good tool to have. It's a good tool even if you are committed to wearing a head-worn mic, even if that's part of your character, whatever. You show up for that one gig and something goes wrong, and all they have is a mic, a handheld mic. Now you're comfortable. You've blocked your show to be able to use that microphone, and I feel like for those of you who have seen it, am I missing? Am I leaving out stuff? I don't know. That's the basic. It's a 90-minute lecture, and there's a lot in there, a lot of technical information, but also just a lot of tips and tricks on how I do it, how I make it work.
And that lecture has gotten rave reviews by a whole lot of people who are the sort of in the know people, the people who would know like that this is, how sometimes we talk about the real work, like it's like, oh, this is the real work. If you're a working pro and you are, especially if you're touring, I really, want to point out what you just said. At some point you're going to go somewhere and the only thing that is going to be available is that Shure SM58 and it's corded and you're like, there's too many people here for me to yell. I can't do that.
And I primarily work with a wireless handheld microphone, but I've done like comedy festivals and things where I just want to use the mic that they've already got there.
Yep.
And I don't want to set up my mic and then have to wait until everyone's done before I can leave. You know what I mean? So I can do my show with a corded mic. It's a little bit more challenging, but just to know that you can do it, there's a level of confidence that you have in knowing that you don't freak out. And in my case, when I had a corporate event where they asked me to use a lavalier mic instead, and I said yes because that to me was not a deal breaker, and to them it seemed very important.
Yeah.
So I did it, and I felt so restricted. It's the opposite of what you would think. You feel like a handheld mic is restrictive. I felt so restricted with a lav mic because and part of that is the blocking. Like I know from doing the show, like where my hand normally is at this point, and then I switch it to this hand and I use this hand, gesturing, and I lose some of these tools that I have built up from using a handheld microphone. But
great, this is fantastic.
Using a handheld, you are able to convey an ownership over your domain, like taking the mic on and off, like smoothly, not fumbling with it, moving the mic stand around where you need to go around a person or whatever, shows that you're just so comfortable where you're at and doing what you need to do, to keep the show going.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of like, signaling direction and signaling, confidence, but there's also the visual. I am doing a comedy magic show. I want to be seen as a stand-up comic performing magic. And so holding a handheld microphone, you can't look more comic-y than that. Like that's just what comics look like, to the point where every once in a while we'll see a stand-up special where the comedian is not using a handheld mic, and it's almost bizarre. It takes a moment of adjustment. And I do use a neck holder, occasionally. I use it for 2 of the bits in my show, and I would love not to. I just haven't quite figured out the blocking. It's something I'm still working on using it with a stand. But when I was in college, I saw Carrot Top. Amazing show, by the way. I had no idea I would like Carrot Top that much. I loved it. He was hilarious. But there was a whole 10-minute section in his show where he used a neck holder. And it wasn't like the kind that we see where it's like a little black string with maybe a little piece of metal with rubber around it, like a gimcrack or the Freedom holder. There are 2 or 3 really great ones on the market. But his, I think he had made, and it was white, and it extended to put the microphone in front of his mouth, much like a singer would hold a microphone.
Okay.
And I stared at it. I missed all of the comedy in those 10 minutes. I was just staring at this weird thing because he never acknowledged it. So when I put mine on, I make a joke about it because it's a weird thing, My friend Eric Diddleman calls it a microphone necklace, which I think is brilliant. But yeah, I have a little joke that I say when I put it on, and that helps sort of excuse. It's one of those things that if the audience notices it and you don't acknowledge that, there's tension, and you have to acknowledge the tension and release the tension.
So good. This is wonderful. This is fantastic, and I certainly want to be respectful of your time because, well, I'm not really sure actually, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So
you want to be respectful, but you're not sure why.
Yeah, exactly. So as we start to wrap up here, is there anything else you want to share? Is there anything else you're like, I'd like to mention this or whatever? These are, the folks who are listening are folks of all different, obviously I.B.M. members listen to it. It's the I.B.M. podcast, but I mean, this is just a podcast for people who are interested in the art of magic. So if there's anything else that you'd like to share, feel free.
I mean, not really. I think we've covered a ton. The only thing I can say is I listen to a lot of podcasts and I always get really mad when they don't locate the killer at the end. So maybe I'll just say I did it just to provide some closure for folks. It was me the whole time.
And now you know.
Yeah.
Michael Kent was the guy. He's the guy with the candlestick.
Oh, and listen to my podcast. I have a podcast that has nothing to do with magic.
I was going to say it if you didn't.
Thank you. I am wearing. I didn't do this on purpose, but I'm wearing a T-shirt of my podcast because I'm a nerd. I have a show called The Internet Says It's True. And basically, it's stories from history that sound made up, but are actually 100% true. And we've been going for 277 episodes, 277 weeks. We've been doing that. I've been doing that podcast. It was a pandemic project, so that tells you how long it's been since then. We've been, and I'm usually pretty good at getting that out every Monday. The last 2 weeks I've completely missed because I've been on the road and just I've neglected it. But it's fun if you like stories that are. I explain it as it's a history podcast for people who don't think they like history. That's kind of what it is. Fun stories.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. By all means, check it out.
I'm a listener. I was also a guest on it one time.
You were a guest, yeah.
It's such a fun podcast. You learn all sorts of weird things. One of my favorites was about the Pablo Escobar.
Oh, the cocaine hippos.
The hippos. Unreal.
Yeah, Pablo Escobar had his own menagerie in Colombia that he just started importing animals, and he imported 2 hippos from Africa. And today, decades after he's been dead, there are hundreds of hippos in Colombia that are not native to Colombia because it's a great
they're thriving.
Location. They're thriving. They have everything they need there, but the Colombians don't know what to do with them. There's a big fight always about are we going to castrate these hippos or sterilize these hippos? Are we going to? They won't. The local people love them around the Medellin area, and so. But they're eating crops and they're dangerous in the water, obviously. So yeah, it's a crazy story with lots of parallels I've found. There are whenever I talk about an invasive species story, the Pablo Escobar hippos come up.
That's great. That is great.
Yeah.
Wow,
You're
what a conversation.
Listening to Hippo Talk with Jason and Ben.
That's right. What a great conversation. I speak for Scott, even though Scott has somehow disappeared from the podcast. He had,
He
for
has a
some
very
reason,
important meeting to go to.
yes, a very important meeting. But we are so appreciative of you jumping on here and talking to us for the last hour and sharing your thoughts. There's some real gems in this podcast, folks. I would go back and listen again, and especially if you're developing your comedy, developing your style. There's just some really great stuff in here. Uh, this is the I.B.M. podcast, and if you are interested in checking out more about the International Brotherhood of Magicians, check out magician.org. That is Magician, magician, not musician, magician.org. You can learn about our annual convention, which is coming up, where Michael's friend Jonathan Burns will be appearing at our annual convention in St. Louis this July. All sorts of details there about that, a lot of great talent. We would love to connect with you, and we would love to see you at the convention. Well, friends, if you want to give any notes, if you want to give us some feedback, you can check out our socials. They are in the show notes, and you can always make a comment on these clips on Facebook and Instagram. For Scott Cantrell, Ben Young, Michael Kent, my name is Jason Michaels. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.